Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Augmented Podcast Live. We are your hosts, Michael,
and 一家.
and Shannon is also on the call, I believe.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, hello.
Yep. Yeah, let me share everything correctly. Okay.
So today we're super excited to welcome Dora and Caleb. I think we're going to get started with a quick intro about what this event will be and what the podcast is, and then we'd love to introduce Dora and Caleb and talk about their really exciting work that just came out.
Sounds good. I think, Michael, we can start with introducing what has happened in the last few months since we started this podcast initiative.
Yeah. So if you can all still see my screen, I want to share a quick, maybe 3-minute presentation about what we've been up to. So yes, we are the Augmented Mind podcast. It's Yijia, Shannon, and myself. We are PhD students at Stanford and MIT. And this is an effort we've started for, I guess,
I think we are planning this at maybe October last year, and the first episode was actually out at the beginning of this year.
Yeah, so this has been like a long time coming. We've been planning this for a while, and I think the main reason that we wanted to start something like this is there's sort of two sort of perceptions of AI that we wanted to talk about. And first of all is this inside perspective in the AI community towards human-centered AI. That human-centered work is sometimes viewed as non-technical or slowing down the progress towards, artificial general intelligence. We're going to try to build this technology.
AGI anymore.
Right. And so we wanted to sort of make this podcast to showcase that human-centered work can be very technical, can be very impactful, and this discussion about slowing down is interesting in its own right because, potentially slowing down for the right reasons or whatnot, or like, I don't think human-centered work inherently has to slow down progress necessarily. So we had this, and then on the outside perspective, there's this idea that AI is going to lead to massive job loss, which I think is a very important discussion to have. It can be very true. But it's also something that's like very nuanced, and there's ways that AI can create jobs and ways that AI can positively impact society as well. So it's good to have a nuanced and thoughtful discussion about this technology.
Yeah, that's the main motivation of why we are thinking about starting this initiative starting from this year. And since January, I think we have been making a lot of progress, right?
I'd say so. So we have our little intro, maybe 1-minute pitch here, and I think then we have some...
AI used to be a distant promise. Now it permeates our lives. In just 3 years, we went from chit-chatting with ChatGPT to having them control our computers, write code, and beyond. We seem to do more with powerful agents, but are they actually augmenting us? We often find ourselves spending more time to fight against AI sloppiness, searching for subtle bugs and hidden incorrect facts. Multiply this across everyone. How does our society wrestle with AI reliance at a massive scale? It seems the hard part was never to build this technology, but to build a machine that can collaborate and work with people.
To me, again, human-centeredness is yet another North Star for AI, is that AI can be a family of technology and as well as products and services. But that North Star for me is benevolence for humanity and for individuals.
So, what does ideal collaboration look like? How do we develop AIs that augment our mind instead of replacing it?
As scientists, we were responsible for all uses of these technologies and the downstream effects, whether they be via malicious users or inadvertent, or even deeper currents of how the systems end up flowing into society and changing things.
These questions really fascinate us. If they resonate with you too, let's embark on this journey together. We've got some answers and thoughts to share with you.
So yeah, that was our little motivating video. And as Yijia mentioned, I'd say we've made some exciting progress towards this. So these are our first 4 episodes. We've invited Omar, Sherry, Wusuk, and Ken on the podcast. And we're excited to announce that The next episode will be with Jeremy Avogad, who is creator of Lean. So Shannon had a great interview with him as well. And I think that was a really thrilling discussion about how AI is going to impact mathematics at such a critical time. We've seen the OpenAI release on the Erdos problem. So I think this is all a buzz right now and a very exciting time to be looking into this.
Yeah, and I think for today's event, basically it's also our first time to try to use this live stream format to share with people some other works which we haven't planned it out in our normal episode. Also, just as a preview, I think at the end of this year, we also plan to do some special episodes beyond like the normal episodes we are releasing right now. So maybe it's a great time for now to introduce our guest today, right? I think there are more people joining now.
Yeah, so I think now is a great time maybe I'll stop sharing screen and we can switch to a more discussion format. So we're really excited to have Dora and Caleb on the podcast today. Dora and Caleb are the co-first authors of this human-centered LLMs report, which was actually stemming from a course project where a lot of students came together and wrote up all of their findings about different branches of human-centered LLMs and human-centered natural language processing and the connections to HCI and the deeper currents in society. And Caleb and Dora put their heads down and wrote and revised and edited and made this into like a really incredible, complete, long report that kind of gives a great overview of the field and I think ties into everything we really care about on this podcast. So I mean, I don't know if you guys want to say
that's a major reason for us to invite them because I think right now a lot of our episodes is focusing on like every small aspects of like what it makes for technical human-centered work. But recently for the efforts led by Dora and Caleb, it's more like trying to provide an overview of what's the roadmap or some reflection on this direction. Also, very excitingly, today we have another special guest. I actually saw her showing up just now. I think we will have like my advisor Diyi later join with us at the last 20 minutes to do a QA, live QA with all our audience today. So maybe Dora and Caleb, you two can start with a very short self-introduction to share with our guest who you are and what you are currently working on.
Yeah. One sec. Let me enable our like progress bar. Sorry for that. Yeah. Okay.
By the way, this progress bar is, I think, the outcome of human AI collaboration.
Yes.
Okay. We're good. We're good now. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Caleb Ziems, and I am about to start my final year of my PhD at Stanford, where I'm working with Diyi. I'm in the NLP group, collaborate with people in HCI, and broadly care about evaluating social intelligence and cultural competence in large language models, particularly for social sciences. So recently, I've been working on a project investigating whether scaling laws actually hold for large language model simulations on human social behavior, opinions, and longitudinal outcomes. And generally, like on the evaluation side, I'm a very big advocate for active human AI collaboration, like co-annotation, and from a recent example, to evaluate cultural knowledge in large language models, I've found that most prior works kind of either have researchers define static questions on culture that humans and LLMs answer passively, and then they compare the results, or people use knowledge extraction to build benchmarks from naturalistic data. And in a recent work called Culture Cartography, I show that if we can evaluate data from kind of a mixed initiative approach, taking the insights of LLMs to help us find low confidence, long tail knowledge, and asking humans to help us find salient knowledge, then this can be a better, more reliable way of evaluating cultural competence in LLMs.
Cool. And I can introduce myself. Thank you for giving me a platform. I'm excited to make my podcast debut. I'm Dora. I'm a third-year PhD student at Stanford, where I'm also co-advised by Diyi and Michael Bernstein. So I work at the intersection of HCI and NLP. Really, my research, I'm interested in how we can design AI systems for long-term human benefits. And this kind of takes shape in two ways. First, I'm interested in how we can measure how LLMs are actually impacting users, looking at both at the individual psychosocial metrics. So we had a really awesome work looking at well-being and AI companionship, and then also looking at societal level impacts, such as changes to the labor market. And then also as an HCI person, I'm really interested in building new systems that promote long-term user benefits. quick example, my most recent work was called behavior latticing, which, for instance, provides a method for inferring user motivation from unstructured interaction data, which we then show can create agents that better address users' kind of underlying needs rather than just sufficing for the task at hand.
That's very cool. I think before we move on to let Dora and Caleb to take over to share exactly what this work about and a lot of stories behind it, I do want to share at the second half of today's live stream, we'll answer the questions people have in a more live manner, even though our team has prepared a lot of questions in advance. So suppose for our audience, if you have any questions you are interested to get a take from Dora, Caleb, and also Diyi later, feel free to just send it out in our live chat, and we will later help you to ask them. Great. Now I think Dora and Caleb, could you maybe just spend 5 to 10 minutes to first just help us audience to get a sense of what this work concretely is about and potentially what motivates you guys to run this classroom experiment?
Yeah, thank you, Isha, for this chance to talk. We have some slides prepared for this purpose, so hopefully this helps us in our discussion. But feel free to chime in with questions. And I really just want to thank everyone also for tuning into the live webinar. Since it's an experiment, I'm eager to see how this works, as everyone is, and it's an honor to be the first in this experiment. So yeah, our paper is titled Reflections and New Directions for Human-Centered Large Language Models. And I want to point out how that title, it suggests that this isn't really just a survey of prior literature. It's actually more of like an active and future-oriented roadmap to help us understand how to develop LLMs in a more human-centered way. And it has more than 60 pages of insights from over 50 student authors. As you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, this was kind of orchestrated and led by Dora and myself. And it was the brainchild of our advisor, our mutual advisor, Diyi. So since this is the Augmented Mind podcast, I don't think it's very hard to convince the audience about the motivation for this work, but I do want to spend some time on that. Let's see. From day one, you saw in the video, EJ and Michael have emphasized the importance of and the technical challenge of human-centered design in AI. And this is something that Dora and I really believe is the next frontier of AI, not just as more capable models emerge, but the frontier is where AI can actually help and lead to more meaningful lives for humans. So formalizing this goal was our motivation for writing the paper. We noticed that the trajectory, like the current trajectory of AI, has pretty much been guided by technical benchmarks and capability milestones, asking, what is it that models can do? Like, can more knowledgeable and intelligent models help us to actually can help models to better solve our personal and our work tasks? And you can see kind of from plots like those on the right, we get consistently more capable models each year, and somewhat as a function of scaling laws. But as a human, like a more human-centered perspective is more than capabilities. We aren't content with just technical progress for its own sake. We actually want to know what AI can do, but also what kind of world we can build with AI. So how can we help understand whether AI creates avenues for human flourishing, heightening, like, yes, our productivity, but also our creativity, our agency, and our well-being as individuals and as a society? So I think this is really a good time to be asking these questions. Whether we like it or not, AI is becoming a really big part of our world, and it's shaping healthcare and finance and education and law and science. And the answers to these human-centered concerns are much harder to come by sometimes, since they're not being explicitly optimized for, and they may not follow clean scaling laws. But I love that on this podcast, the goal is to look for concrete and technical answers to these kinds of human questions. And that's what we hope our paper actually provides. So I'll hand it off to Dora to give some of a breakdown of the paper.
Yes, so I think the report itself is quite intimidating. It's very long, so I'm going to give a nice succinct overview of what we do. So maybe like breaking down the structure of the paper, we start with talking about HCI, and this is really a deliberate choice. We wanted to really have a backbone to define what human-centered LLMs are in terms of who's being affected, like the stakeholders, what are the design challenges we're facing, and how HCI methodology can really help. And like, for example, one of the challenges within HCLMs is this like gulf of envisioning, right? Like you have models that are really capable of doing all these things, But as users, it's quite challenging to even imagine, what this large space is and how I can actually direct models to do this. And so, like, for example, interaction techniques and interfaces in HCI can help us bridge this gap. And then next, we look at some of the model development more from an NLP perspective. And so we look at how training data really reflects people, institutions, culture, social context, and so on that produces this data. And from these origins, we can also think about issues like bias, privacy, and data ownership. And then we talk about post-training. So we highlight tensions and trade-offs around a lot of common post-training methods like preference tuning, personalization, pluralism, and kind of tie it back to some of our earlier data discussions around bias and representation. And given that scaling is such a common paradigm, we also explore the limitations of scaling laws for human-centered objectives. And then we end up highlighting pitfalls and best practices in evaluation, and we kind of look at it at 3 different scopes. We look at the model output, the human experience, and then more broadly thinking about societal impact. And we really discuss how currently the field is relying a lot on these surface heuristics that aren't enough for orienting LLMs to really be long-term collective good objectives that can benefit humans. And then finally, after design and development, we look at what does responsible deployment look like? And in particular, we explore sort of a tension between these 3 different ideals, so interpretability, steerability, and safety. And in particular, we kind of look at how, for example, certain alignment and steering methods can make models less interpretable, or more steerable models may actually be less safe, and so on.
Yeah, so I think a takeaway from each of these sections in their synthesis is that human-centeredness is actually more than like a patch, an alignment objective. It's a design approach that spans the full pipeline of LLM development. And there aren't really simple answers all the time. So to make it more concrete, we actually have a case study at the end of our paper. It's our final section on applying HCLM methodologies to the future of work. So in this domain, it's very important to think about the who question from HCI. Like there's different stakeholders here in the future of work. We have workers, employers, customers. They all have different goals and needs, and there are probably tensions between their goals and needs. And there are different human considerations. And there's also tensions between the human-centered factors that we discuss at the different stages of the pipeline. So with workers, it's possible that LLMs are actually really useful for worker needs, but workers might not know how to specify their intent, or they might be unaware that certain capabilities from the model exist. And as Dora mentioned, this is the gulf of envisioning. We see that it's important not to consider just model performance within an assumed kind of frame of interaction, but to actually zoom out and think about what are the assumed frames that are suitable for a particular user's goals. Like, is dialogue-based prompting the best way that you can give your intentions to a model? Omar's, from the first episode of this podcast, Omar's generative user models discussed this, and so there's an alternative paradigm to the kind of dialogue-based prompting. Many assumed frames are actually implicit in NLP training, like the assistant template of instruction tuning datasets that we discussed like in the 3rd chapter. This assumption is that LLM should be helpful assistants that basically just passively respond to queries rather than being proactive. But more proactive systems might require non-conventional data, like a user's file system information or the image capture of their screen. So it's important to think at the training data stage, what are the decisions we're making and how does this kind of imbue the process with our values and our expectations about what these models should do. So if we have more personalized models, it will probably require a lot of very personal data across modalities, and that leads to a mounting concern over privacy, amplified by as we have more agentic and autonomous AI systems. So the question that here arises is how do users actually keep their agency over their control of their data and the representations that are formed about them? It's a really tricky design and also technical problem that different users will have different norms and expectations and needs that you need to think about with privacy and agency. And this is kind of like a second order personalization objective. So in order to actually keep users' privacies and agency, we actually need to have models to be steerable. But building more steerable models might have them be more interpretable. You understand the model's tendencies, its blind spots, its biases, and also its capabilities as a function of training data. So you can kind of see that there's this very big, messy web of spaghetti here. And the purpose of all this is to illustrate some of the key insights from before.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So I know we moved a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I was waiting for the animation. That was Mr. Krabs. And AI could never have thought of making that meme, just to put it out there. But yeah, so I guess maybe now to kind of synthesize, I think we just dumped a lot of content, but maybe to like break it down. First, I think a key takeaway is like human-centeredness is a design approach that kind of spans the entire pipeline, right? It's not just alignment. And in fact, if you kind of notice, we didn't really talk about alignment explicitly in this discussion so far. And I think that's really a distinguishing feature of the report is that we kind of cover this full pipeline and expose all of these interconnections, right? There's been a lot of work that have done surveys, but they really kind of focus on individual slices. And in this work, we are framing HCLMs within a much wider scope and emphasize the inherent dependencies of interconnections that come about from different design decisions at different stages. And I think with these dependencies, there are also really fascinating tensions that are often difficult to work through or resolve, right? Like you might feel like Mr. Krabs, and you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many things that I have to think about. And I think that's inevitable, and it's really the beauty of designing human-centered things. It's what makes this work hard, right? And you have to balance between different stakeholders, interests, and different trade-offs. And so, not to belabor the point, because I think we all want to get to the kind of Q&A part, but we really hope that by highlighting all of this, we can convince you all and model developers that we're at a really critical juncture point, right? We can't just focus on model capabilities. LLMs aren't just isolated tools bounded by these like very static performance metrics or leaderboard positions. And they're actually, these socio-technical systems with a really global influence. And because of that, we have to grapple with who is and isn't involved in and accounted for in the creation of these models. And really, kind of, as Caleb already said, the answer isn't just simple patches or like downstream alignment problems. Human-centered LLMs need human-centered decision making at every stage of the pipeline. And we really hope that this paper ends up providing a framework and common ground for a lot of different communities, people coming from academia, industry, developers, stakeholders, and so on.
Yeah, this is very good. I think this is a really nice overview of what this paper about. And actually, besides the content, I do know like for you guys to write this really large paper together, it's not a single person effort, but it's also trying to have like rethink about how the university should run a class. So actually, before we open the floor for our live questions, I do think our team has a lot of things in our mind. Shannon, do you want to first ask a few questions like our team is curious about?
Yeah. Thanks for the presentation and it's awesome work. I don't know if that's helpful, but maybe you can. We don't need to restart sharing, but yeah, or maybe you can. But I'm actually very curious, like, for those who just open the paper, what's your maybe one or two aspects that you like the most, or the very unexpected parts of the paper that you think? Yeah.
Dora, do you want to start?
Yeah. Okay, I guess maybe maybe a takeaway that I had or like something that I learned through writing this paper is that like I think coming into it, I was in this mindset of having a pretty narrow interpretation of what human center meant. Like I thought a lot about it in terms of, safety or like preventing harm, etc. But I think it's really important to understand that avoiding harm is not the same as maximizing user benefits. And it's like a quite challenging design problem to think about how we can design LLMs to promote user flourishing and to present, and this presents like a whole new set of challenges that we have to think about and that hasn't really been really captured in like the work so far.
Cool. Yeah. Caleb, do you want to share a bit?
Yeah. So I briefly mentioned at the beginning that my interest in research is around evaluations. And I think writing this paper really led me to grapple with the reality that the benchmarks aren't just like a neutral contribution to the field. And evaluation as a whole is a subset of AI that massively shapes like the future of AI. This is just true of evaluation, but I think at each stage of the pipeline, we need to see the decisions being made as influencing like the broader the outcomes that we're aiming for, the optimization targets that we're setting. And so I think as we like a broader takeaway is that a point that you often make on this podcast, I think, which is it's time for LLM developers to see human-centered concerns as not just like an afterthought. You have to be careful at each stage of the pipeline. And we can move our engineering and evaluation beyond like atomic capabilities and into the realm of human interaction, societal outcomes. And by doing this, we actually can advance AI beyond the bubble of like technical competence and into the world for real positive impact. Like I think now is a time when not just researchers, but everyone is realizing this potential. And so it's a great time to be thinking about these things.
Yeah, thanks. I do love the way you picture or you depict this like the super interconnected all the aspects all aspects of the different components, the training pipelines. In the sense that things they are so largely deployed, so widely deployed. It's not just like a single objective. It's just not simple like toyish tasks. It's permeates into our lives. And then I guess, ultimately we're doing the largest live training and evaluation in human history in the sense that everybody's using that and all the data will be feedback into the training again. That's awesome. Great. The other is, this paper is kind of like a mixture of different perspectives. There's an NLP perspective, there's an HCI perspective. Alignment people might like it, or safety people may want to check it out. So how to use this paper for different audiences? I think that's because this is such a, it's impressive that you have, it's such a long report, but also it's kind of like you need some sort of menu for different audience to read it and use it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one way to kind of answer this is thinking about different audiences. So I think one audience that we're targeting are actually students entering AI. I want to start by thinking about this.
Kind of like a roadmap, right?
What's that?
Kind of roadmap. Yeah.
A roadmap. Yes, exactly. So for people who are now entering this space, it's AI is a very rapidly evolving field, and so when students are trying to understand, how can I contribute? What should I do? It's not as simple as it was, 6 years ago when I started my PhD. Back then, I could just say, like, I want to do NLP and I want to take some CS coursework on architectures and tasks and benchmarks and rocket. But I think now it's really like you have to confront all these things from like design principles and ethics and machine learning and policy. And these are things that college students learn in very different departments across a like standard college curriculum. And they have very different vocabularies and values and standards for doing things. And so it's disorienting, I think, for students who want to enter AI and have a positive impact and not just kind of, play their piece kind of unquestioningly. There's lots of questions to be asked here. So I think students, like this paper can help students and early career researchers understand like where they can contribute, where their expertise plugs in, and also how their local expertise intersects with other kinds of expertise. And I think Dora can maybe say a little bit more too about like how to read the paper, how the structure of the paper lends itself.
Yeah. I think I agree. If you're looking at the paper, like 65 pages is like probably more words that I've read in a long time. But I think the way that I recommend that you do it is like each one, like let's say you're an NLP researcher, like you can start at your chapter, and the way we've designed it is that it links out to the other chapters. So like in particular, I think if you're coming from a background in NLP, what is really useful is to look at HCI work and think about how this different discipline might impact what you're doing. But like I think the challenge is that like different disciplines have different languages, different considerations, etc. So I recommend you could like start by skimming your section and then link out to understand like how does this web actually connect to these other aspects. And if you have more time, actually reading the chapters that are most distant from your home field to really understand what different people are thinking about, and then kind of reflecting on how you can apply it to your own kind of contribution within the HCLLM space.
Yeah, that's awesome. It also reminds me of something like a catalog, right? It's like when I saw your last slide, it's like you can start maybe with from the keywords, and then everything is getting interconnected. I try to read a bit of this paper, but I'm not sure how it looks like exactly for each of the chapters, but I can imagine that we can pick starting from a keyword, and then you can start to gradually link to other sections and then start to grow this knowledge in this domain. I think that's super, super cool. Yeah, great. Also, like this is a very interesting collaboration in the sense that it's less typical. This is like we can start to write a paper, but that's like a typical way of researchers talking to each other. I think this is more or less like, oh, there's a class of students who is actually contributing, who made a lot of like interesting comments over there. I'm actually a bit curious, like how did this idea start, and then how did it take shape, and just generally curious, like how did the whole project happen?
Yeah. So I actually have some end slides that I can use to kind of talk about this.
Please.
I have just brief slides. So this was the brainchild of Diyi in her CS329X course on human-centered large language models in the fall of 2024. And I was a TA at the time for the course. So the idea for this was actually as a part of the course, and Diyi can also chime in and say more about like the kind of conceptualization of this project. But my role, from my perspective as a TA, we had this kind of assignment where each student would take a subsection of a chapter. And the chapters Diyi had organized in advance with subsection headers. They signed up for their sections. So there's 6 broad sections, 37 subsections. So students would either pair up with another student or write solo on their subsection. And this led to our draft 1, which was a large, like 90-some page document. We graded it, we evaluated it, and then in round 2, we actually expanded it and had any student who was interested, kind of beyond the curricular expectations, to volunteer and play a role at kind of advising in the revision of a particular chapter. So, I mean, Michael can actually chime in on this experience, but we had different teams. So like there'd be a chapter lead for each chapter, a content contributor, someone who was checking all the references. There's, we cite literature from across many different disciplines. So it really requires this kind of collaborative effort with, I have expertise in NLP, so I'll check the NLP citations and enhance that kind of side, for example. And then this was the kind of course context. Beyond that, then with Dora, we did a very substantial final pass of this paper. So I think maybe we can talk a little bit. I won't kind of talk about this now, but we can discuss a little later some of the insights gained from this process of kind of merging the disparate contributions of many students from different disciplines. But this was a huge effort. We kind of took this by chapter and wrote some chapter revisions, increased the synthesis between sections. Like some sections would be talking about the same thing, but they hadn't really merged and like had a dialogue. So we increased the kind of dialogue nature of the paper and kind of condensed it down for easier or like more efficient communication. So I don't know if this is a good time to, but I also would love for Diyi to chime in on some of the kind of conceptualization of this.
Do you want to share anything right now? Even though according to our progress bar, it's not your turn yet, but Caleb already mentioned there are some takes you could provide. Maybe you can share. Is this things working out as you plan out, or is like a lot of things happening which are quite unexpected?
Okay, you can just treat me as a digital twin of Diyi for now, before the real myself shows up. Yeah, so I think Caleb did an amazing job. To me, the goal was very simple. I wanted to teach a course, and there was no textbook, and it's a new topic. And also, I feel like we are in a very different stage of education, where like the external world just goes so fast, and a lot of the earlier materials may not be able to give students a very kind of concurrent view. So I think it was a combination of let's create a textbook-ish existence and also find a new way to motivate the students to learn. So later I come up with this format where actually students get credits for contributing to this class level report. And I think it's also a very natural way for students to contribute. In order to finish a chapter, they need to read many papers. They need to distill them into a very convincing argument. We also encourage people to work with each other for different chapters. They criticize, etc. So to me, it was only like probably 10% of the student contribution, but I think it provided a very unique way for students to actually learn and contribute. And this kind of like report we produce will be the readings for my future students. And I hope that more people can actually join these efforts. So in the end, we will have a textbook so that I do not need to worry about teaching.
That's very cool. Feels like a new form of data flywheel.
The course data flywheel.
This is fabulous because that also reminds you of like what Richard Feynman said, right? It's like if you cannot explain, you can, if you cannot recreate, you did not learn, right? But also the other analogy I have is like it's kind of like you're running like a little conference, right? Students form like small groups, and each of them make a submission. in like a paragraph of section style, and then you do have, I don't know if I think you are the ultimate like AC or PCs for this conference in terms of deciding whether the content can be getting, and also you do the final editing to post this like a conference proceeding as a final piece. So I guess I don't know if that's a good analogy, but maybe one last question, and then we can switch to audience, which is, okay, apparently this is a human AI collaboration themed podcast and a paper. So how is AI being used in the creation of this paper and then the final draft? Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a controversial topic in many domains, the use of AI. We chose that this work would reflect our values, our opinions, and I think interestingly, this work is identifying not really the literature that exists exclusively, but the gaps that exist, understanding like the frameworks for thinking about what is there and what remains to be filled in. So this kind of leap, I would say, this kind of it's not just summarization of an existing state of the field, but really like a roadmap and a future reflection on future directions. This, I think, was something we all felt was necessary to be human-centered. We had to focus on the human contributions. I think there were, interestingly though, in the discussion of AI, there interestingly are some takeaways, I think, from this process in terms of building language models in a human-centered manner. Like you're describing the conference proceedings style. It's like, I think similarly in the design of large language models, how do you take the inputs and values and contributions of stakeholders and people from different communities who may have different vocabularies and levels of expertise with AI and kind of incorporate that into something cohesive? I think it's a similar problem in writing this paper. We had students taking the course. It was a CS course, but I think students were coming from many different backgrounds, like social science. We had social scientists in the class. We had people from STS studies, HCI, NLP, and each of these people had, different ways of seeing the problem space, and the merging process had to be human-centered, I would say, because there's always like value judgments. There's always decisions around how to emphasize and constrain the discussion in a way that is productive and unfolding narratively. Yeah, so I think this is like a really interesting thing. Dora can also probably speak to some of the experience in the revisions and the process of making this cohesive.
Yeah, I guess I will mainly say I think doing this really underscored the human advantage, or maybe the PhD advantage that we have. In that, like, I mean, yeah, I wish like if an AI could have done this for us, it would have saved us a lot of, like, Caleb and me, a lot of time and a lot of like messaging. But yeah, I think actually like reflecting and thinking about like where is the field going, what is important, and like what are the gaps in the literature, that is something that's like a fundamentally human problem, and it required us to really like put our heads down and like also merge across chapters and like think about how are these disparate fields talking to each other, etc. I think that is a product of human labor.
Right. I do see a recurring theme, which is decisions. And also, like, I think Ted Chiang, he said something like, AI cannot automate creative work. And then his example is like, he said as an artist, you make a lot of decisions in your work. And I think this is a kind of this decisions make it like human-centered. It's like your choice of how to interpret this source content and your choice of which way to highlight and which way to reconcile these different domains is purely like reflects your value and your perspectives. And I think that's why even with AIs, I think we should still value writing themselves as a venue to share our thoughts. And maybe that's why this paper is so good that everybody should read. Okay, yeah, maybe, okay, that's awesome. Okay, maybe we talked too much. Maybe we can shift to the audience for audience questions.
Yeah, I think this is a great chance to do that because this question transitions very nicely to a great audience question we have. So I guess first of all, if the audience has questions, please feel free to send them now. But we do have one already that's really related to this idea of like blending perspectives and interests and everything. So the question is, human-centered implies one human, but a deployed language model serves users, it's developed by the developers, and it affects bystanders all at once. So when the interests of these different groups collide, whose values get centered and who decides?
Maybe we can take it from different sections, Dora. Like we could describe the answer to this in terms of different aspects of LLM development. I would say that from the data side, I've largely thought about the data side, some of the NLP side of this. There is a question of pluralism, like what is the representation of data? Where is it coming from? So I think to address this issue of pluralistic needs, we need to start from the data and its origins and the story of how this data is created. And if every data source that we use is, created by companies or sourced from the same distributions of web data, then we have inherent biases stemming all the way back to pre-training. And so the question of who are we designing for? I think in initial stages of language model development is aiming for pluralism, I think is the solution. And then I think even before you have data decisions, you have overall LLM design. And I think there are, different language models can be, they're general purpose tools, but then the use of them is a human-centered concern. So I think Dora can also expand there.
Yes, I think whoever asked this question could probably write or has foreseen a lot of the things we discussed in chapter 2 on HCI, in which in fact, it's not just one person. I think there are, the developers there, and we talk about direct stakeholders like users, but there's also indirect stakeholders. Like, for example, if you're having a healthcare deployed LLM, it's not just the patients and the doctors, it's also, the caretakers of the patient. It's like the insurance providers and so on. And I think there are almost an infinite amount of people that you could consider. And I think there are probably two perspectives to share here. First is kind of understanding whose values or whose voices ought to be heard. I think that is maybe, as Shannon said, a decision that you make as the developer, and thinking about who is actually going to be impacted, whose voices might not actually be heard the most. Oftentimes in development, we're prioritizing a certain set of people that get to develop these models. So when we're thinking about it in a human-centered way, perhaps we ought to consider those that aren't involved or are less kind of highlighted. And then the second perspective that we talk about is thinking about participation. So Caleb mentioned pluralism. I think another P word to think about is participation, and thinking about how can we actually get, let's say, these stakeholders involved in the creation of models. I think there's a whole kind of rabbit hole in discussion to think about when is participation good, when is it needed, what are the benefits of it. That I think we don't have time to talk about here, and I recommend you read the report to think about. But I think really kind of championing end users or people that are impacted to get more involved in development is a really essential part.
Yeah, this is a really good answer. I also thank the audience for asking this very insightful question. So I think right now, according to our original progress bar, this is a moment where Diyi will officially join. So I think now it's not Diyi's digital twin, but it's actually Diyi, lovely advisor. So right now, I think we'll still be waiting for some audience to ask questions. I think it will be an awesome chance for you to, if you have any question for Diyi, it's a good chance to ask. But actually, to just start the flow a little bit, I do have a question that I'm curious to hear these sorts. So I think recently there has been a lot of debate around what's the value of university education or even classroom education in general, given suppose people just want to learn about the concept, they could use LLM or whatever AI technology to learn. And I'm just curious to know your thoughts about how this classroom or education would evolve, especially given, I think even for this paper, it's an outcome from classroom experiments.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a very timely question, especially given that right now, with coding agents or with general purpose LLMs, you can get a lot of tasks done. So basically, if a student is motivated enough, I'm sure you can actually use it to learn any kind of concepts. I think there are some kind of misconceptions when we think about higher education and even the workforce to some extent. I don't remember the exact citation, but there has been studies showing that your higher education is probably correlated with your first job, but it's actually not going to be super highly correlated with your, let's say, most impactful work or the job that you feel most proud of or you take on for a very, very long time. So, and then this actually highlights a lot of things that higher education is bringing to the space. So I think a lot of what we are thinking about is actually how to really enable people learn how to learn. technology will evolve. We have GPT-5, 6 today. Maybe we will have something very different in 2 years. So it's really not about like, oh, the concepts, the knowledge needs to be around how should I use those tools to do something. It's more about the mindset, the critical thinking, the creativity, and also earlier Shannon mentioned like decisions. So I think a lot of this kind of sense and also like people like this word like taste, but also just a lot of this kind of adaptive capabilities. I think those are what a lot of our education can actually offer. And I think also there is this motivation aspect. Higher education not only just provide you with knowledge, it also provide you with a community, with a cohort. Like in this classroom example, I'm sure people form connections with each other. They need to work in small groups. They need to present their stuff. So there are a lot of other kind of transferable, or maybe I would call it like timeless capabilities that people are picking up in this process. And it's really an open space for you to think about and bounded and constrained questions, problems, something that may not be linked to profits, but it's going to be beneficial for humanity as a whole. And I think this just like a very quick comment to the last question. Like right now, I think we use human-centered LLMs as an umbrella to refer to this kind of human-centeredness design. But the question was great in a way that it highlighted there are not only individuals involved here, there are also communities, organizations, and also humanity behind a lot of the technologies we create. So this space is actually huge. And I'm glad that the class made a first move towards this. And I'm very excited to see how future iterations would improve it.
Yeah, this is very cool, but I also have just a very quick follow-up thoughts about this because you also mentioned one thing that this education or even classroom practice still offer is teaching people how to learn, given like the world is changing in unprecedented speed, I would say, even compared to the time when I start my PhD.
Yeah.
So it's pretty crazy. But I'm thinking like, suppose it's a person who just joined, like just start university or even just start to think about their career. Do you have any thoughts about how they should kind of keep up with the trend, or what's their strategy to still keeping sane while being able to make any contribution? Because I do found many students around me, they have a very common concern is like, oh, well, tomorrow there may be another version of language model. Like every day there is a new breakthrough. Then how can I meaningfully learn stuff or meaningfully contribute to the field?
Okay, first let me say that I feel like this live stream is like a revenge of my students towards me. You are asking all these kind of hard questions on the fly, even without giving me a hint. But I think this is a question that's really concerning. I definitely feel the fear and I feel the anxiety that people have. I also feel like many people feeling very lost in the process. Not only students, I think like if you think about other job or like even professors, I think like this is a big change in many, many dimensions. I think like if I'm thinking about, okay, if I were going to get started, which I really want to, like if go back to like many, many years ago, I think first is like use AI as much as you can. I think power users today can actually benefit a lot from this kind of AI use. Going back to like students are learning how like learn to learn. Okay, so you can use AI to teach you concepts, but like how AI should teach you concepts? Maybe AI can tell you a story. Maybe they can create animation. Maybe they can give you a quiz. Maybe they can tell you a joke. Maybe they can use a lot of the like lived experience to share you with those concepts. But like all of them are not like they are there. You need the agency, you need initiatives to really trigger many of those aspects. And that's like one thing that I think like human advantage lives in. The second is that be curious about something. And I think despite we have very, very powerful technology today, a lot of the fundamental questions are still not answered. Why the model goes to certain size and start to show those kind of capabilities, why the recipe is like this, why hallucination still occurs despite we can achieve 100% on certain data sets. So I think many of those questions are just not there. And more importantly, I think we see more of how this kind of AI can really help us transform other fields. So there seems a huge potential in terms of what we could do with it. And then at the same time, I think there are also a lot of concerns in terms of job loss and other type of things. To be very honest, I don't think I have a very good answer in terms of this. But I do believe in human resistance. Basically, I think we as a whole, we have a lot of collective intelligence. And this is also why this podcast is great. I think like many of the earlier evidence already showed that augmentation, human plus AI, is actually going to give us more, because by the end of the day, it's not only just a competition of who gets the job done faster. It's actually about let's find new things, let's find more things to work on, more markets, different type of things, some questions that we were not able to answer before, something that seems so cool. Now we can finally have time to do it. So I think it's really about a new discovery we are all experiencing. So, but at the same time, I agree, it's a very kind of confusing time.
Yeah, this is a very good
Yeah.
answer. To be honest, it even reminds me, like we are right now
Yeah.
post-editing our episode 5. I
Yeah.
think it will be releasing very soon. So in that episode, we are talking with Jeremy, who is the creator of LinkPad, and he's also a mathematician himself. So during the interview, I remember there is a sentence is really impressive to me. He's saying, well, AI may have the answers, but like mathematicians have the questions. So I feel this is also resonant with a lot of like the answer Diyi just gave. Is right now it's not maybe the way for people to approach or just to cope with the time is just to use AI more, but we still want to have the agency to make sure we are the person who raised the questions rather than we are the person who just passively complete a task. I think this might be a way to go through. Yeah. So Michael, I also saw like there are some like people asking the questions in our live chat. Could you maybe pick some and
Yeah.
give the room to our audience?
Let's do it. So we've got some great questions online. I think the first one is probably for you, Dee. And it's again a bit about academia and what the role of AI is, but
Spicy.
yeah, it's a hot topic. We have so how would you envision the change of AI researchers in academia? What will AI research or the life of an AI PhD look like in 10 years? And how should we approach human-centeredness as a community? I guess two-parter.
Wow, that's a lot of question. You know, one lesson I learned as a faculty is to never make predictions. So I'm not going to answer the question of what would happen in 10 years. If I can predict that, you know, I can do a lot of things.
Right.
So I guess just going back to the AI research field and AI researchers, first, there are a lot of exciting research, including some research from our lovely lab member who has been doing a lot of the kind of AI for science, AI for scientific discovery. I think like overall, like AI is great as a tool to help us actually processing a lot of information, generating hypotheses so that we have the capacity to test or for AI to test many of them. So I think there is definitely going to be a very transformative change there. On the other side, I think this also echoes what Yijia mentioned earlier. When I think about the process, so if you think about research and then scientific method, it is find the right problem and then forming hypotheses, like executing it, analyzing results, and reporting the back, and then finding new problems. So the whole process of scientific method, if you think about that, execution is only one part of it. Finding the right question to ask, the curiosity that a human have. Like for example, if we think about outer space, if we think about why certain things happen, like humans have very natural desire to be curious and to figure out the world like around us, to understand why certain things make people unhappy or happy, etc. So I think there are a lot of this kind of lived experience, the society we care about. All of those actually inspire us to ask the right question. And also when the results give us some insights, let's see, you know what to analyze, how to make sense of the results. And I think we are talking about AI research, but this is not only just like applicable to like other fields like humanities or social science, even within like AI research. Briefly, we mentioned about like ethics or many other type of things. Like what would be a great question to ask? And also, I think that capability give us some kind of insights in terms of what type of thing to focus on today. So I guess like I'm going to make another kind of promotion of this human-centered LM space. My hot take is that if today you have a problem in computer science that's very easy to verify, and you may have data, and with those two dimensions, I think you can just use AI to solve it. To some extent, this is a bit too like extreme. So then what's left, or instead of like framing it as what's left, what can we do with the time we have? I heard this story where many people are talking about like the reason why self-driving car is great is not because okay it's self-drive. It's actually about they free up their time so that they can now listen to podcast, learn about things while they are driving. So it's actually about this. So now I think like if you think about we do not need to focus on those things, then we can actually focus on more difficult tasks. Difficult may now mean like math or coding difficult. It could mean fuzziness. A lot of the problems we talk about here and Caleb and Dora presented is actually really fuzzy concept. We want to make sure AI can enable human to flourish. But what does that mean? Can we actually operationalize it into objectives? Can we actually construct some kind of process data to optimize this kind of goal? And I think all of those are the beauty of research. That is, we need to navigate this ambiguity and really navigate this kind of undefined space. And that's where I think a lot of AI researchers should think about how to really treat fuzziness as a new frontier here.
Yeah, this is very well said. I think we even got a lot of materials to making clips, Michael.
Yeah,
Yeah,
very interesting.
Just don't take the hot take one.
Take the best one. But anyway, I think we still have like maybe 2 questions.
Yeah.
Let's cover them.
Let's do it. So
Very end of our live stream today.
definitely. But yeah, great answer. Really love the idea of the human curiosity being maybe one of our human advantages and driving our research forward.
No, not the only one, just to be
Not
clear.
the only one. We have another question. One of our viewers said, I noticed that the paper is mainly built on works from the 21st century or even after 2020s. So do you think it's important to involve some more classic or fundamental works in machine or computational philosophy earlier? And what are some of your thoughts about how to interface with maybe that literature?
Maybe I can try to start. Okay, cool. So this is a really good question. I think in the introduction, we emphasize that questions around what is the definition of harm and benefit? What does it mean to be transparent? These are philosophical questions. People have answered them with different philosophical traditions, and different communities have different perspectives on these things. It's kind of a very plural space. And so we implicitly leave pointers to fields like philosophy throughout the work, pointing to that these questions remain unresolved, and this is where you have to resolve them in a human-centered manner. So I don't think, so one perspective could be we could use a particular tradition, but in this paper, we don't choose to specifically identify ourselves with any particular like philosophical or value-based tradition. We just mainly use very recent literature, like largely recent literature, to expose the current pipeline in language model development, where the tensions exist, where the questions exist. And then the answers to these questions, we do actually point to somehow like technical solutions to these problems, but we don't really point to philosophical or value-based kind of judgments about the answers to these value-based questions. So I will say that if anyone has any additions to that.
I'll just say, I think a lot of the visions of what humans can interact with computers or interact with LLMs are quite old, but the capabilities of the time of like writing were not there. And now we have models that can do a lot of these, like that have the capabilities to do this. And I think what is really exciting is taking this and then executing on these visions and also reflecting on, is this what we really want?
definitely.
Yeah, maybe
No,
one last sentence to echo what Dora mentioned. I think like even this kind of like human-centeredness, this word may be new, but this kind of like a man-computer symbiosis, I think like Dora, if I remember correctly, this is also on the HCI qualification exam, where it's from like the 1960s, talking about like how systems should think with humans, not for them, right? This is actually what a lot of the systems were designed in a way that's not really empower human. And there are also like, I think like similar time period work of talking about how to augment the human intellect to kind of build technology co-evolving with humans. Maybe at that time it's more about some kind of physical like mouse or things like that. Today, I think they are recontextualized with the new technology we have. But the spirit and the vision has been there like since many, many decades ago.
Yeah, that's very cool. Actually, I read that paper, even though I'm not taking the HCI qualification exam. And I think later we will just share the paper link to the comment for today's live stream for our audience to check it out as well. Sometimes when I read those old literature, I always have a feeling that we are so back. It's like even with all this resource capital putting into AI, but sometimes still feel it's not that's making me flourish. It still feels like, oh, we are so back. We forgot a lot of things we care about early on.
Yeah, I think it is incredible that people were thinking about some of these problems many, many decades ago, and just to reflect on the deep thought that has gone into it. So it's, amazing.
The time to just, I think we will end this live stream with just one last question.
Yes, I think this is a final question for everyone, which is how should we think about the differences and similarities between human-centered LLMs and traditional HCI philosophies?
Oh, it's a nice follow-up for what just covered.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I can start. I think one of the guiding philosophies or like guiding principles of our work was actually taking these HCI principles and also translating them into how they fit into the NLP development pipeline, and kind of with the ethos of this podcast, thinking about like, okay, like how can we bridge together HCI NLP and take a lot of these principles that are kind of fundamental to building HCI LLMs and turn them into ways that we can better train models, better develop systems, and so on. And so I think it's not like I'd say a kind of separation or bifurcation, but really kind of a building on HCI principles and tying them into technical methods.
Great.
Yeah, I would say that kind of something I emphasized earlier is the scope of this work. I think HCI methodologies have a long and rich tradition of interventions and decisions at particular levels or particular stages, like the interface design or initial conceptualization of a product. But I think this work is focused on many different levels. And so one of these levels is, for example, pre-training data. This is not something traditionally covered from an HCI perspective, but we can use a lot of HCI methodologies and design thinking to make the decisions that we do make at the kind of NLP side or the technical, the like model development side.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And overall, I think we just want to thank you all so much for coming on the podcast and the live podcast, our very first iteration. I think this is a really incredible work spanning so many diverse parts of the field and how it affects all of us working on the technology, affected by the technology, using the technology. So it's really opening up a lot of very exciting questions about how this technology is having these deeper currents in society, as Eric Horvitz said. And I feel this is like a really fundamental work that will really encourage a lot of exciting exploration and scaffolding the work to come. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for all our guests today for this precious time. And also I thank all our audience for these very interesting questions and for staying with us and support our podcast. Yeah, thank you so much. And maybe we can share the link for people if they want to subscribe or just follow up on latest update. I think so far we've already been producing 4 episodes, and the 5th one is on the way. And we're also planning for having some special events and
yes, so keep in tune, and we're going to have episode 5 releasing very soon and special events to come, as Eugene mentioned. So very excited